This is how real players move. 60 million. Sharks.
Sis, stick to your little projects.
Noted. They're called Apex Dynamics.
Dad, I am Apex Dynamics.
You're lying!
What have you done? You enjoyed lying to us?
I enjoyed building. As for the lies, I have the logs, the phantom vendors, the account numbers.
Be my daughter, or be the one who took my company.
You can't be both. I am both. Chairman Emeritus, figurehead only.
We don't inherit legacy, we ship it. Weekly releases, customer-first integrations, and no more complacency. Understood.
My name is Olivia Harrison, and I'm 32 years old. In my family, you're either the golden boy or you're invisible. I was back home for Thanksgiving, at our estate in Connecticut, which was supposed to be a rare moment of family peace. But as we sat around the dinner table, my father dropped a bombshell. He announced he was selling the family's $60 million tech company, and that my siblings and I were getting absolutely nothing. My brother erupted in rage, but I just felt a cold, calm focus settle over me. This was never just about the money. He had absolutely no idea that the ruthless investor he'd been negotiating with for 6 months was sitting right across from him. If you've ever felt completely underestimated by your own family, drop a comment below, and you'll definitely want to subscribe, because the look on his face is priceless. The humiliation of that boardroom, it didn't break me. It forged me. I left Boston with $5,000 to my name, a beat-up laptop, and a fire in my gut so intense it felt like it could burn down the entire city. I flew to San Francisco, not because I had a plan, but because it was as far away from my father's world as I could get. The first few years were brutal. I mean, truly brutal. My apartment was a shoebox in a questionable neighborhood, the kind of place where you learn to sleep with one eye open. Rent ate up nearly my entire savings, so my diet consisted of 2 main food groups: instant ramen and cheap coffee. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My life became a relentless cycle of coding. 80-hour weeks weren't the exception. They were the norm. Then 90. I took any freelance gig I could find, building garbage websites for wannabe influencers, debugging ancient code for companies that were already circling the drain. Every dollar I earned, every single cent that wasn't spent on rent or ramen, was funneled into my own project. My real project. I started my own company, but not as Olivia Harrison. That name was an anchor, tied to a legacy that had rejected me. I needed a clean slate. So, I became A.R. Sterling, A for Olivia, R for Rose, my middle name. Sterling. Well, that just sounded solid. Unbreakable. Apex Dynamics was born in that tiny, roach-infested apartment, fueled by caffeine and pure, unadulterated spite. And the core of it all? The beautiful irony was that it was built on the very idea my father had publicly ridiculed: the cloud-based integration platform. The one he called an academic idea. I refined it, modernized it, and made it 10 times more powerful than my original pitch. For the first 3 years, I was a ghost. I didn't date. I didn't have friends outside of a few online coding forums. My only social life was the occasional painful phone call home. I kept it vague. "How's the startup going?" my mother would ask, her voice dripping with pity. "It's coming along, Mom. Still figuring things out," I'd reply. My father never even bothered to ask. In his mind, I had already failed. He told my mother once, thinking I couldn't hear him on the other end of the line, "She'll be back when the money runs out. Give her 6 months." That was 10 years ago. His dismissal was the jet fuel I needed. The breakthrough came in year 4. I landed my first major client, a mid-sized logistics company drowning in outdated software. My platform saved them. It didn't just streamline their operations, it revolutionized them. Word of mouth in the tech world travels faster than a denial of service attack. Suddenly, A.R. Sterling wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a name whispered in venture capital meetings. They came knocking, waving term sheets with dizzying numbers in my face. But I remembered my father's boardroom. I remembered what it felt like to have your creation taken from you. I took their money, but I never gave up control. Majority ownership. Non-negotiable. Apex Dynamics grew, and it grew fast. I hired a small team of brilliant, hungry engineers who didn't care that their CEO worked out of a tiny apartment. They believed in the product. We moved into a real office, then a bigger one. By year 7, I started acquiring other companies. Small, strategic acquisitions that complemented our technology, expanding our reach, and making our platform indispensable. All of this was done from the shadows. A.R. Sterling became known as this enigmatic, reclusive founder, a genius who rarely gave interviews and never appeared at industry events. On the rare occasion I had to make a public appearance, I'd change my appearance subtly. Glasses, a different hairstyle. I let my COO do most of the talking. He was the public face. I was the silent engine. And my family? They remained completely, blissfully unaware. To them, I was still just poor Olivia, playing with computers in California. The little startup was their running joke at family gatherings. During our infrequent holiday visits, which I always paid for by flying coach, squeezing into a middle seat, I played the part. I wore jeans and a hoodie. I talked vaguely about projects and clients. I let them believe what they wanted to believe, that I was struggling, that I needed them, that I had made a mistake by leaving the safety of the Harrison name. They had no idea that the little startup was now a privately held company valued at over $250 million. They had no idea that I, their forgotten daughter, personally owned a controlling stake worth more than their entire family business. They had no idea that while they were pitying me, I was building an empire. Their ignorance wasn't just an oversight. It was a strategy. Their underestimation of me, that was my secret weapon. And for the past 18 months, I had been aiming that weapon directly at the heart of the Harrison legacy. This wasn't just about building a bigger company anymore. This was about a strategic takedown, a hunt. My first move was pure intelligence gathering. I became the world's foremost expert on Harrison Dynamics. I didn't just read their public quarterly reports, I dissected them. I hired a private firm of forensic accountants to analyze their financials, to find the hidden weaknesses, the inefficiencies my father's pride wouldn't let him see. His company was bleeding market share to younger, more agile competitors. Their technology, once industry-leading, was now a decade out of date. Their top talent was leaving in droves. My father was a king sitting on a crumbling throne, completely oblivious to the rot in the foundations. My next move was a test, a final olive branch, though he would never see it as such. 6 months ago, I had my CFO, David Chen, send an anonymous partnership proposal through a third-party investment bank. The proposal, codenamed Phoenix, offered to inject a massive amount of capital and our cutting-edge integration technology into Harrison Dynamics. It would have saved the company. It would have allowed the Harrison name to remain, revitalized and stronger than ever. It was a chance for my father to accept help without his ego getting in the way, to choose progress over pride. I knew he would reject it. His arrogance was the one variable I could always count on. The rejection came less than 48 hours later. A one-sentence email from my father's assistant. Mr. Harrison is not interested in partnerships with smaller, unproven entities at this time. Smaller, unproven. That single email sealed his fate. He had failed the test. The time for partnerships was over. The time for conquest had begun. Now I have moved on to the acquisitions. This was the brilliant, brutal core of my plan. It wasn't enough to just buy his company. That would be a simple transaction. I wanted to dismantle his power structure from the outside in, to own the ecosystem his company depended on before I ever made a final offer. My first target was Nexus Data, the primary supplier of server hardware and data storage for Harrison Dynamics. They were a publicly traded company, and after a few months of strategic, quiet stock purchases through shell corporations, Apex Dynamics became their largest single shareholder. I now had a seat on their board. Suddenly, Harrison Dynamics' supply chain was no longer guaranteed. Their costs mysteriously started to rise. Their delivery schedules became less reliable. My father was furious, but he saw it as a problem with a supplier, not as an attack orchestrated by his own daughter. Next, I went after their clients. Their two biggest contracts were with Westfield Distribution and Sterling Logistics. Both companies relied heavily on Harrison Dynamics' outdated software, and both were desperate for an upgrade. I didn't buy them outright. I did something smarter. I acquired smaller, innovative tech companies that were their direct competitors. Then I approached Westfield and Sterling not as a predator, but as a savior. I offered them a deal they couldn't refuse: access to Apex's superior technology platform at a fraction of the cost, in exchange for a significant equity stake in their companies. Within 6 months, Apex Dynamics owned 30% of its two largest customers. I now had the power to influence and eventually dictate where they spent their software budget. The python was slowly wrapping its coils around its prey. The final stage was the preparation for the direct offer. In my corner office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, my team and I worked for weeks, wargaming every possible scenario. David, my CFO, handled the financials, structuring the $60 million offer to be just generous enough to be accepted by a desperate board, but far below the company's inflated legacy valuation. Evelyn Reed, my chief counsel, drafted the ironclad acquisition contract, full of clauses that gave us total control, leaving no room for my father to maneuver. The day before I was set to fly to Boston, we had our final meeting. The entire plan was laid out on a massive digital whiteboard. The network of acquisitions, the financial pressure points, the timeline for the reveal. It was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. David looked at me, a serious expression on his face. AR, he said, always using my professional name in the office. The plan is perfect. The numbers work. But are you sure you want to be there for the detonation? You could close this deal from here. Sending you in there. It feels personal. It feels risky. I looked at the board, at the intricate web I had woven over the past year and a half. He was right. It was personal. That was the entire point. I'm not just buying a company, David, I told him, my voice quiet but firm. I'm closing a chapter. I started this in that house, and I need to finish it in that house. I need to look him in the eye when it happens. I needed him to see me, to finally, truly, see the woman I had become, the woman he had created. The signs that something was off started a few weeks before the holiday. The phone calls from my mother became more frequent and strange. She'd always been interested in my life in a sort of detached, superficial way. But now her questions were pointed, probing. So, Olivia dear, how is your little company really doing? Are you making any real money yet? Then, a week later, you're not still single, are you? I do hope you find a nice, successful man to take care of you. It was so transparent. She was trying to gauge my financial situation, my stability. Her tone was overly sweet, like cheap perfume, and it set off alarm bells in my head. My father, who usually communicates in one-word grunts, actually sent me a text. A full sentence. Looking forward to seeing you for the holiday. That alone was enough to make me suspicious. I felt a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Something was happening. They were planning something. I landed at a private airfield outside Boston. A black Bentley was waiting on the tarmac. This trip was different. Every detail was a calculated move, a piece on the chessboard. As I stepped out of the car at the family estate, my mother greeted me at the door. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in my appearance. The Armani suit? The Patek Philippe watch? "Olivia, darling," she chirped, embracing me. "You look different." She chattered away about Thanksgiving preparations as she led me inside. "Your father is in his study," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "He's been so busy with some huge deal. Very hush-hush." I smiled a tight, knowing smile. "I'll go say hello." The study had always been my father's sanctuary, a fortress of leather and mahogany. I knocked once and entered without waiting for an invitation, a small act of defiance. He looked up, surprised. Then his expression settled into its usual mild disinterest. "Morgan, you made it," he said, his hug brief and awkward. I glanced at the papers on his desk, and there it was. The acquisition proposal from Apex Dynamics. My company logo stares right back at me, my heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. Just then, my brother Ethan strolled in, a glass of scotch already in his hand at 3 p.m. He was the golden boy, the heir apparent, despite having the business acumen of a doorknob. Well, he slurred, raising his glass in a mock toast. "The prodigal sister returns. Still playing with computers out in California?" That's when it happened. The moment that solidified everything. My father, seeing Ethan, lit up as if the real guest of honor had just arrived. He completely ignored me, turning his full attention to my brother. He picked up the thick binder from his desk, my binder, my proposal, and held it out to Ethan like a sacred text. "Ethan, my boy, you have to see this," he said, his voice booming with pride. "This is the offer, $60 million, all cash, from a company called Apex Dynamics." He said the name with reverence. "These guys are sharks, son, real killers. This is how the big leagues work, not like those little app startups." He and Ethan huddled over the documents right there in front of me. They pointed at clauses, discussed valuations, and my father explained the intricate details of the deal to my brother as if he were a trusted advisor. They spoke as if I weren't in the room, as if I were a piece of furniture, or worse, a child who couldn't possibly comprehend the adult conversation. Then, my father turned to me. He actually patted the binder, a condescending, dismissive gesture. He looked at me with that familiar expression of pity mixed with superiority. "Olivia, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a bit over your head. We're talking leveraged buyouts, exit strategies, things a person running a small boutique shop in Silicon Valley just wouldn't understand." Ethan smirked, taking a sip of his scotch. "Yeah, sis," he added, his words slurring slightly. "You stick to your little coding projects. Maybe one day you'll make enough to pay off those student loans." And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It turned to ice. They weren't just ignoring me. They were using my own success, the empire I had built in secret, as a tool to belittle me. They were praising the predator, completely oblivious that she was standing right there in the room, watching them. They were celebrating a deal that would strip them of everything, and they were using it to lecture me on my own insignificance. The sheer, staggering arrogance of it, the absolute blindness. It was breathtaking. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just gave them a small, empty smile, a smile that promised retribution. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to their celebration. The fuse had been lit. The bomb was set to go off at dinner. At this point, watching this, I don't even know what word to use for how this feels. If you're feeling the same way I am right now, help me out and drop one word in the comments to describe what this family just did. Just one word. because instead of breaking down, that feeling, that cold, hard feeling, it was about to become the fuel for everything that happened next. I walked out of my father's study and headed upstairs to my old bedroom. The house buzzed with the excited energy of the impending deal, the low murmur of my father's voice on the phone, and the sound of my brother laughing loudly in the living room. Each sound felt like a distant echo from another world. As I stepped into my childhood room, it was like stepping into a museum of a person I no longer was. The debate trophies, the computer science awards from high school, the MIT pennant hanging crookedly on the wall. They were all artifacts of a life spent desperately trying to earn an approval that was never going to come. For a moment, I ran my fingers along the dusty shelf, over a picture of a smiling, bright-eyed girl in a graduation gown. A girl who believed that merit and hard work were enough. A girl who thought her father would eventually see her. But standing there, in the silence of that room, I didn't feel the familiar sting of hurt. The usual ache of disappointment was gone. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was nothing. It was a profound and terrifying emptiness, a void where a decade of pain and longing used to be. And in that void, a single cold thought crystallized with perfect clarity. They will never change. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a fact. Like gravity. Like the sky being blue. My father would always see me as the little girl with academic ideas. My brother would always see me as his irrelevant little sister. My mother would always choose the path of least resistance, enabling their behavior to keep her perfect, fragile peace. All my life, I had been operating under a flawed premise that if I just worked harder, achieved more, proved myself more valuable, they would finally see me, Olivia. Not the daughter, not the sister, but the capable, intelligent person I had become. That hope, I realized, was the real chain that had kept me bound to their judgment for so long. And in that moment, in that dusty bedroom, the chain shattered. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break. It was a quiet, final snap. The pain didn't transform into rage. It transmuted into something far more dangerous. It became a focus. A cold, clear, diamond-hard focus. The game had changed. This was no longer about wanting their love or their approval. This was no longer about proving them wrong. This was about ending it. On my terms. It was about taking the power they thought they had and showing them what real power looked like. The time for emotion was over. It was time for execution. I walked over to the desk where I had spent countless nights coding as a teenager, dreaming of the very future I had now built. I didn't cry. I didn't smash anything. I simply took out the sleek, encrypted laptop I carry with me everywhere. It's my real office, my command center. I powered it on, the faint hum of the machine the only sound in the room. The familiar glow of the screen illuminated my face. I bypassed the family's sluggish Wi-Fi, tethering directly to my own secure satellite network. No digital footprints here, no traces. My actions from this point forward had to be precise, methodical, and invisible until the moment of impact. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, a secure message to my CFO, David Chen. The message was simple, coded in our internal shorthand. Phase 3 green light. Confirm final wire transfer authorization for Aero 800 EST tomorrow. No contingencies. A reply came back in seconds. Confirmed. AR wire is locked and loaded. Godspeed. David was one of the first people I ever hired. He knew the whole story. He was more than a CFO. He was a co-conspirator. Next, I opened a secure video channel to my chief legal counsel, a shark of a woman named Evelyn Reed. Her face appeared on my screen, sharp and focused, even at this hour. She was in her office in New York, surrounded by stacks of documents. my documents. Evelyn, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any emotion. Any last-minute changes from their end? Any red flags? She shook her head, a grim smile playing on her lips. None. Their legal team is pathetically complacent. They're so blinded by the $60 million price tag that they haven't done any deep dives on our holding structure. They think we're just another aggressive tech fund. They have no idea we own their supply chain. Good, I said. Keep it that way. The press release is scheduled for 0900 EST. I want it to hit the wire at that exact second, not a moment before. I need maximum impact. It's automated and triple confirmed, she assured me. The moment the wire transfer is confirmed by the bank, the release goes live. Olivia, are you sure about this? Handling it in person? I looked around the room, at the ghosts of the girl who used to live here. I have to be, Evelyn, I said. Some things you have to do yourself. We disconnected. The final piece was a quick check of the market data feeds I had set up to monitor Harrison Dynamics and its key partners. Everything was stable. The calm before the storm. I reviewed the final acquisition contract one last time, my eyes scanning the legal jargon I now knew as well as I knew Python or C++. Every clause, every subsection, was a brick in the wall I had built around my father's company. There were no loopholes, no escape hatches. The deal was ironclad. My legal team had spent a year making sure of it. After closing the laptop, I sent one final text. It was to my best friend, Isabella, the one who had seen me at my lowest, sharing a wall in those adjacent studio apartments, celebrating my first small contract with a cheap bottle of wine. The text simply said, "It's time." Her reply was instantaneous. "Burn it all down." I took a deep breath. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. For 10 years, they had seen me as a ghost, a failure, a footnote in their grand family story. They had no idea that the ghost had spent that decade forging a weapon. And I was about to bring it home. I would walk down to that Thanksgiving dinner, sit at their table, and listen to their plans for the future. A future they thought they controlled. I would let them have their moment of triumph. I would let my father stand at the head of the table and deliver his grand pronouncements. And then, when the moment was just right, I would calmly, quietly, and completely dismantle their world. The war was already over. They just didn't know it yet. All that was left was the final, devastating reveal. Walking down the grand staircase into the dining room felt like stepping onto a stage. The air was thick with a strange mixture of festive cheer and palpable tension. My mother had outdone herself. The long mahogany table gleamed under the crystal chandelier, set with the kind of china that only came out for holidays and funerals. A massive turkey, roasted to golden perfection, sat as the centerpiece. It was a perfect picture of a perfect family, a carefully curated illusion I was about to shatter. I noted with a grim sense of irony that I had been seated at the far end of the table, as physically distant from my father as possible. Typical. Ethan, the crown prince, sat at his right hand. Chloe, the social media princess, sat to his left, her phone already propped up to capture the perfect Instagram story. The pre-dinner conversation was excruciating. Ethan bragged about a golf game with a client. Chloe gushed about a new brand collaboration. My father held court, radiating an energy of supreme confidence, the look of a man who held all the cards. I remained quiet, a passive observer in their theater. I sipped my wine slowly, watching them, studying them. No longer the hurt daughter seeking a crumb of validation, but a CEO analyzing a hostile board right before a takeover. Finally, as the pumpkin pie was being served, my father did it. He tapped his knife against his crystal water glass, the sharp ping silencing the room. He stood up, beaming, a king addressing his loyal subjects. I have an announcement to make, he began, his voice full of dramatic weight. An announcement that affects the future of this family and the Harrison legacy. Chloe immediately started a live stream. Of course she did. As you all know, he continued, I have dedicated my life to building Harrison Dynamics into an industry leader. But the time has come for a new chapter. I have accepted an offer to sell the company. The sound of Ethan choking on his wine was immediate. What? Dad, you can't be serious. My father raised a hand for silence, clearly reveling in the drama. The deal will be finalized tomorrow. This brings me to the second part of my announcement. He paused, letting the suspense build. The proceeds from the sale, $60 million, will not be going to your children as an inheritance. That's when all hell broke loose. That's our birthright! Ethan slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. He was on his feet, his face flushed with rage. I've given 10 years of my life to this company. You promised me. Chloe started wailing, real tears streaming down her face, though she kept her phone angled perfectly to capture her most flattering crying face for her followers. But Daddy, my brand, I'm a Harrison heiress. Throughout the chaos, I remained perfectly still. I took a small, deliberate bite of my pecan pie. It tasted like victory. My mother, who had been trying to calm the storm, noticed my unnerving calm. Her eyes narrowed. Olivia, she said, her voice barely a whisper across the length of the table. You don't seem surprised. The room gradually fell silent as everyone's attention pivoted to me, the forgotten child at the end of the table. My father, brother, and sister all stared at me, their shock and anger momentarily replaced by confusion. Actually, I said, gently placing my dessert fork down on the plate with a soft click. I just have one question. I looked directly at my father down the entire length of that polished table and held his gaze. Who is the buyer? My father's chest puffed out with pride, thrilled to be back in control, to hold the one piece of information we didn't. A very successful, very aggressive tech investment firm, he announced. They're called Apex Dynamics. I let the name hang in the air for a moment. I took a slow sip of water, savoring the final seconds of their ignorance. I could feel the tectonic plates of my family's world beginning to shift beneath us. And then I delivered the line I had rehearsed in my mind for 10 years. My voice was calm, clear, and cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. Dad, I said, I am Apex Dynamics. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Absolute frozen silence. I watched the emotions flicker across my father's face like a corrupted video file. Confusion, disbelief, a flash of dawning comprehension, and then the first sparks of pure, unadulterated rage. Ethan knocked over his wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. What the hell are you talking about? He demanded, his voice cracking. My father finally found his voice, sputtering. That's preposterous. Apex Dynamics is run by A.R. Sterling, a respected, ruthless investor, not my... He couldn't even finish the sentence. Actually, Dad, I said, reaching into my purse and sliding my platinum business card case across the table. I am A.R. Sterling. My voice was level. Morgan Elizabeth. I founded the company 10 years ago, right after you humiliated me in front of your board and called my ideas impractical. The chaos that erupted then was 10 times worse than before. My father was shouting about lawyers. Ethan was accusing me of corporate espionage. Chloe, incredibly, was still live streaming, whispering, "Oh my God, you guys! My sister just bought our company," to her phone. But it was my mother's reaction that truly blindsided me. She stood up, her hand trembling as she clutched her wine glass. She wasn't looking at my father. She was looking straight at me. Her face wasn't angry. It was a mask of profound, devastating betrayal. So that's what this was, she whispered, her voice laced with a venom I had never heard from her before. All these years, all the lies. Mom, I didn't lie. I started, but she cut me off, her voice rising with each word. Didn't lie? What do you call it, Olivia? Every phone call where you told me you were just getting by. Every Christmas you missed because you claimed you couldn't afford the flight. You let me believe my own daughter was struggling, failing, all alone 3,000 miles away. You let us worry about you, pity you. She took a step forward, her knuckles white around her wine glass. You did all that just so you could have this nasty little moment of revenge? To watch us squirm? Her voice dropped to a hiss, and her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. You didn't just go after your father's company. You used our love, our concern for you, as a weapon against us. You are a cold, cold-hearted girl. You're just like your grandfather was. She said it with such finality. Brilliant, yes, but cruel, and with no heart. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words sucking all the air out. My father's anger, my brother's accusations. I had been prepared for all of that. I had armor for it. But this I was not prepared for. Her accusation didn't just target my actions, it targeted my entire being, my character, my very soul. It reframed my decade of struggle and sacrifice, not as a story of triumph, but as a calculated, cruel deception. In their eyes, I wasn't the underdog who had won. I was the villain of the story. The victory that should have been so sweet suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. I had their attention, finally. But I had lost something far, far more important along the way. My mother's words shattered the fragile victory, leaving behind a battlefield of stunned silence. The abandoned Thanksgiving feast grew cold. The candles burned low. One by one, they left the dining room, not with a bang, but with a defeated, bewildered shuffle. My father stormed off first, the sound of his study door slamming shut echoing through the house like a gunshot. My mother followed, not even glancing in my direction, her shoulders slumped. Chloe, after a final, tearful sign-off to her followers, scurried upstairs. Ethan lingered for a moment, his face a twisted mask of confusion and rage, before throwing his napkin onto the table and stalking out. I was left alone, sitting amidst the ruins of a family I had just conquered, and yet had never felt more distant from. The triumph I had anticipated for a decade felt hollow, replaced by the bitter sting of my mother's accusation. Cold-hearted. The words echoed in the cavernous silence of the room. I retreated to my old bedroom, the only safe harbor I had ever known in this house. Below me, the house descended into chaos. I could hear the muffled roar of my father's voice, no doubt on the phone with his lawyers, desperately searching for a loophole that I knew didn't exist. Interspersed with his fury were my mother's placating tones, trying to manage a crisis far beyond her control. The storm I had unleashed was in full force. My phone began to vibrate incessantly, a barrage of texts from Ethan. The first few were pure rage. You treacherous bitch. I'm going to destroy you for this. Then, as the reality of his situation presumably began to sink in, the tone shifted to panicked pleading. We can fix this, Olivia. Just call it off. Dad will make you an EVP. We can work together. It was pathetic. A sharp knock on my door startled me. It was Ethan, his tie loosened, his face pale and sweaty. He didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me into the room like a cornered animal. We need to talk, he hissed. I closed the door and leaned against it, crossing my arms. About what, Ethan? How I ruined your Thanksgiving? Or how you were about to inherit a company you helped run into the ground? You think you're so clever, don't you? He sneered, pacing the small room. Little Olivia, with her secret identity. Did you enjoy lying to our faces for 10 years? About as much as you enjoyed taking credit for my ideas, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. Remember 6 years ago, at Christmas dinner, when I suggested the company needed to move to a cloud-based subscription model? Dad called it trendy jargon. 3 months later, you presented the same concept in a board meeting as your own strategic vision. His pacing stopped. His eyes narrowed. I was the one who stayed, he seethed. I put in the time while you ran off to California to prove some point. You put in time? Yes, I conceded. But what did you actually contribute? Besides a mountain of expenses on the company card for client dinners at strip clubs and an office you primarily used for napping off your hangovers? His face contorted with fury. You don't know what you're talking about. I brought in the Westfield account myself. I almost laughed. Westfield came to Harrison Dynamics because I, as A.R. Sterling, personally reached out to their CTO and recommended your services as part of my long-term acquisition strategy. I informed him coldly. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Ethan. I've been remotely auditing this company for the past 18 months as part of my due diligence, including the financial records you thought were safely hidden on the local server. The color drained from his face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. What are you saying? He whispered. I decided it was time to drop the hammer. I'm saying I know about the $300,000, Ethan. The money you embezzled through fake vendor accounts over the past 3 years. The phantom consulting fees that went directly into your offshore account in the Caymans. I know about the gambling debts. I know everything. He took a step toward me, his hands clenching into fists. It was the first time I had ever seen him look truly threatening. You can't prove any of that. I held his gaze, unblinking. I have the transaction records, the account numbers, the IP logs showing the falsified entries originated from your office computer on days when security records show only you were in the building. I'm not planning on pursuing criminal charges. It would be bad for the brand during the transition. But don't you dare test me, Ethan. Don't even think about it. The fight went out of him completely. He just stood there, deflated, the bravado replaced by sheer terror. You'd destroy your own brother, he whispered. I'd hold accountable a thief who happens to be my brother, I corrected him. There's a difference. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and yanked the door open, fleeing the room as if it were on fire. The next morning, after a sleepless night listening to the sounds of my family imploding, my father summoned me to his study. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. The arrogant titan of industry was gone, replaced by a tired, defeated old man. He sat behind his massive desk, a fortress that no longer offered him any protection. I chose not to sit in the visitor's chair. Instead, I perched on the edge of the desk, a subtle but clear repositioning of our power dynamic. My lawyers have confirmed it, he began, his voice raspy. The sale is binding. The board vote was unanimous. Of course it was, I replied. The company has been failing for 3 years. The board recognized a lifeline when they saw one. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a weary confusion. Why, Olivia? Why this way? All this deception? This cruelty to your own family? He was trying to make me the villain. I wasn't going to let him. You call this cruel? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Was it not cruel when you humiliated me in front of your entire board? Was it not cruel when you handed Ethan a vice president title he didn't earn, while telling me my MIT degree wasn't good enough for an entry-level position? You talk about deception, but you've been deceiving yourself for years, Dad. You were too blind to see that your son was a thief and your company was sinking. And you were too proud to ever see your daughter as anything more than a disappointment. He flinched, the accusations hitting their mark. We sat in a heavy silence, the air thick with decades of unspoken resentment. Finally, he looked me straight in the eye, his face grim. He delivered his ultimatum. "You have a choice to make right now," he said, his voice hard as steel. "You can be my daughter, or you can be the person who took my company. You cannot be both." The ultimatum, meant to break me, to force me back into my designated box, had the opposite effect. It was the final clarification I needed. It was never about my ideas or my work ethic. It was about control, about my role in his pre-written script, and I had just burned that script to the ground. My father's ultimatum hung in the air between us, heavy and final. "You can be my daughter, or you can be the person who took my company. You cannot be both." 10 years ago, those words would have shattered me. They would have been the ultimate rejection, a confirmation of my worthlessness in his eyes. But standing there, in the fortress he had built, now a fortress I owned, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The last chain had been broken. He had intended it as a cage, but he had handed me the key. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a profound and weary clarity. "That's where you're wrong, Dad," I said, my voice as steady as the desk I was leaning on. "I am both. I have always been both. I am your daughter, and I am the woman who built a $250 million company from nothing. The real tragedy is that you were incapable of seeing those two things in the same person." He stared at me, speechless. The ultimatum had been his final power play, his last card, and it had failed. I pressed my advantage, my tone shifting from personal to professional. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a corporate restructuring. "The press release goes out in 45 minutes, I stated. "Here is what happens next. You will be offered the position of Chairman Emeritus. It's a figurehead role. No operational authority. You get to keep an office and advise on legacy client relationships during the transition. It's a respectful position that allows you to save face." I then turned my attention to the matter of my brother. "As for Ethan," I continued, my voice hardening slightly, "he has a choice. He can resign quietly, effective immediately. He will sign a non-disclosure agreement, and in return for his full cooperation and the repayment of the $300,000 he stole, we will not pursue criminal charges. Or he can refuse, and my legal team will hand over a full dossier of his embezzlement to the district attorney by noon today. The choice is his." Finally, Chloe has built a significant social media following, I said, surprising him. "Her skills could be valuable in the right context. We're launching a new consumer-facing division next year. She can have a role as a brand ambassador, with a real salary and performance-based targets, if she wants to actually work for it." I stood up, my posture straight, my resolve absolute. "These are the terms. They are not negotiable. You have 1 hour to discuss it as a family before my team starts making calls." For the first time in my entire life, I didn't wait for his dismissal. I dismissed him. I turned and walked out of the study, leaving him sitting at his desk, a king stripped of his crown, his kingdom now belonging to the daughter he had cast out. This was a critical moment. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to them. I was dictating the terms. I had chosen myself over their broken version of family. If you support this powerful decision, if you believe in standing up for yourself, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments right now to send some strength her way on this journey. Because that strength, even from strangers, was exactly what she needed to build a new life. I didn't wait around for the fallout. I walked past my mother, who stood frozen in the hallway, an unreadable expression on her face. I didn't say a word. I just went upstairs, packed my overnight bag, and walked out the front door without looking back. The Bentley was waiting. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw my father's face in the window of his study. He just looked small. The moment the car door closed, it was like coming up for air after being held underwater for 30 years. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I bypassed the texts from my family and made one call. To Isabella. Her face popped up on the screen, her apartment in San Francisco bright behind her. She took one look at me and broke into a massive grin. "You did it, you magnificent bastard," she said, no preamble needed. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for a decade. "I did it, Izzy. I'm opening the good champagne," she declared. "The $90 bottle, not asking, telling. Get on the first flight back, we're celebrating." She didn't ask for details about the drama. She didn't need to. She just knew I had won the war. That was the unconditional support I had craved my entire life. A simple, uncomplicated celebration of my success. That's what a real family felt like. Just as we hung up, an email notification pinged on my phone. It was from David Chen, my CFO. The subject line was just one word: done. I opened it. Attached was a screenshot of the confirmed $60 million wire transfer and a link to the press release that had just gone live on every major financial newswire. The headline read, "Apex Dynamics acquires Harrison Dynamics in landmark deal. Founder A.R. Sterling revealed as Olivia Harrison." The final sentence of the email from David simply said, "The world is watching, boss. Welcome back to the driver's seat. The whole team is behind you." I leaned my head back against the cool leather of the seat as the car sped toward the airfield. The texts from my family had stopped. They had probably seen the news release. They were probably in shock, trying to process the public nature of their downfall. I felt a pang, not of regret, but of a strange, melancholy finality. The family I had grown up with was gone. It had been an illusion all along, and I had just been the one to finally pull back the curtain. But as I looked at the supportive message from my team and thought of the champagne waiting for me with my friend, I realized I wasn't losing a family. I was finally free to embrace the one I had built for myself. A family built on respect, loyalty, and shared success. Not on obligation, guilt, and a desperate need for approval. My family of choice. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving. The world looks different now. I'm standing in the newly renovated headquarters of what is now called Harrison Apex Technologies. The old, stuffy mahogany panels are gone, replaced with glass walls and open, collaborative workspaces. There's a buzz in the air, an energy of innovation that the old company hadn't felt in decades. As the CEO, I split my time between San Francisco and Boston now, overseeing the integration. It hasn't been easy, but it's been successful beyond even my most optimistic projections. The company isn't just surviving, it's thriving. The consequences for my family were swift and seismic. My father accepted the chairman emeritus role. In the first few weeks, he was a ghost in the machine, rattling around his old office with nothing to do. But slowly, something shifted. He started mentoring some of the younger engineers, sharing stories about the company's early days. We have a weekly meeting now. For the first time in my life, he actually listens to my opinions on business strategy. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Ethan chose to resign. Faced with the evidence of his embezzlement, he knew he had no other option. He repaid the money using the last of his trust fund, and with some firm encouragement from me, he enrolled in an MBA program on the West Coast. He's being forced to stand on his own 2 feet for the first time in his 38 years. He calls me sometimes with genuine questions about his coursework. The calls are awkward, but they're real. Chloe, surprisingly, has flourished. She took the brand ambassador role seriously. Her social media savvy, once a source of family jokes, has actually opened up new markets for us. She's contributing, earning her paycheck, and for the first time, her success feels earned, not inherited. And my mother, Perhaps she's changed the most. Freed from her role as the family peacekeeper, she started volunteering for a nonprofit that provides seed funding to female tech founders. She told me on the phone last week, her voice quiet but clear, "I want to help other young women like you, Olivia, so their mothers don't make the same mistakes I did." Our family isn't healed. Not by a long shot. The wounds are too deep, the years of dysfunction too ingrained. There is no storybook ending where we all gather for a perfect Christmas, laughing about the past. But we're talking. We're building something new, on a foundation of brutal honesty and clearly defined boundaries. There is no forgiveness, not yet. But there is a path forward, a path where I am in control. Looking back, the journey has been longer and more painful than I could have ever imagined. For years, I was fueled by a simple, powerful desire: revenge. They say success is the best revenge, but I've learned that's not the whole truth. Success is just the leverage. The real victory isn't proving your doubters wrong, it's proving to yourself that you were right all along. The ultimate win wasn't the moment I took my father's company. It was the moment I realized I didn't need his approval anymore. My value was never determined by those who refused to see it. It was forged in the fire of their neglect, built in the silence of their dismissal. This whole experience has taught me that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who respects you, who supports your dreams, and who celebrates your victories without reservation. I lost the family I was born into, but in doing so, I gained the freedom to embrace the family I chose. My team, my friends, the people who saw my worth from the very beginning. True victory wasn't proving my father wrong. It was when we both finally found a way to be right, together. So I want to ask you all a question. Have you ever had to set a difficult, painful boundary with the people who were supposed to love you the most? How did you find the strength to navigate that conversation? Share your story in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can support each other. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice. Because the most important lesson in all of this is that you get to decide who you are, no one else.